Hey guys, I'm the Film Fan, and welcome back to another video. This weekend, after like a year and a half, tons and tons of delays, we finally have a movie that was supposed to come out back in April last year. We finally have Black Widow, the most recent MCU movie, releasing in theaters and on Disney Plus for premiere access for like $30. So, without further ado, let's get into this. Natasha Romanoff, also known as Black Widow, confronts the darker parts of her ledger when a dangerous conspiracy with ties to her past arises. Pursued by a force that will stop at nothing to bring her down, Natasha must deal with her history as a spy and the broken relationships left in her wake long before she became an Avenger. So, the MCU is probably my favorite movie franchise. They've been consistently strong for the last 15 years, and there have rarely been exceptions. I'm naturally always excited for one of their upcoming movies, and this was the first one we were getting in 2 years, thanks to the pandemic and whatnot. There is a 2-year gap between Far From Home and Black Widow. As for my expectations going into this one, I of course was very excited about it. Even if it wasn't going to be great, I knew I was probably going to have a great time watching it anyway. Before I tell you what I thought about it, what did you think about it? Did you think this was a disappointment? Did you think it was a surprise? Is this one of the MCU's best movies? All-time worst? Middle of the road? Let me know in the comments of this review. Anyways, Black Widow. So, let's get talking about the good. And I gotta say, probably the best thing about Black Widow is definitely the family dynamic. I've noticed a lot of movies that come out in the last few weeks have had family themes, and this is another continuation of that trend, which is both a really weird coincidence and really nice. So there's some solid heart in there, and these are all fun characters that play off of each other super well. Going further into that, the two standouts of this film are Florence Pugh and David Harbour. They both do a fantastic job. Pugh kills it as Yelena, and at times kind of overshadows the lead of the movie just because of how charismatic she is in this. More on that later. And David Harbour is also hysterical in this. Like, seriously. Every single frame he is in is like its own masterpiece. He's just so good at this ridiculous dad who clearly isn't, okay in the head. I had a lot of fun with these two. Actually, my dad wasn't previously looking forward to watching this movie. It just didn't interest him that much. But when I told him David Harbour was in it, playing this guy, he was like, "Yep, let's go. Let's go, son." So, yeah, those two absolutely killed it. Both Florence Pugh and David Harbour. I take back the dynamic. They're the best part of the movie. Also, this movie gives some nice origin story for the character of Black Widow. And we get to learn a little bit more about her and see some of her past life, her time on the run. We see stuff, how it ties to the Red Room and tons of other things relating to all that. And we saw so much more of what it was like for her. And this is an action movie, and how is the action? It's pretty great. It's surprisingly brutal, without like going full on R-rated. It's actually, the action has a very large punch to it, which I really wasn't expecting much of. And so I'm glad they went a little bit more different with how they did the action. It reminded me a bit more of The Winter Soldier, in a way, actually, which was nice since that's the MCU movie with some of the best action in it. So that's nice. And then, in general, this movie goes for a much darker storyline. As, I'm in the right slide, okay. it's a lot darker than most MCU movies, especially with the subject matter that it's based in. And obviously, Scarlett Johansson does a great job as Black Widow. We all know that at this point, that she's always going to kill it. And so overall, I had a really fun time returning to the MCU, and this was great on the big screen. However, I did have some issues. Let's move into the mixed, and this isn't a problem with the movie. This is just something to know going in for parents taking their kids to see these movies, since a lot of, even though they're not strictly kids, obviously they're all PG-13, a lot of kids watch them. I just want to make this clear. This is a very hard PG-13, and it is very, very dark. And I'm not just talking about, oh yeah, it deals with some different. There is a scene where they put full attention on how Black Widow killed a child. There is a scene where they make a joke out of a pig dying. There is tons of very crazy stuff in this movie. And I'm just making sure parents are aware this is a little bit different from other MCU movies in that regard. It's not all super quippy. It's a little bit more, even though there are jokes in it, it's a bit more serious, and there is some stuff in there that's kind of suggestive. So I'm just making that known. And I liked that about the movie, that it went a little bit more in a different route than most MCU movies go. But at the same time, it may be it might catch some parents off guard, so I'm letting them know now. And then let's move into actual criticisms of the movie. And my biggest problem with this movie has got to be that I just don't know why Marvel decided to make this movie now. I'm not saying, oh, the hype is burned out, this movie needed to be released back in April last year. No, that wouldn't change anything. But if this movie feels like it was supposed to come out in like 2016 or 2017, this feels so much like a Phase 3 movie, and that lingered on me throughout watching the movie. I could just never figure out why they decided to make this movie after the character was already dead and we were moving on from these characters' storylines. It's just kind of strange to me, and I'm glad we have the movie now, since I've always wanted a Black Widow movie. However, it's confusing as to why we were telling another post-Civil War prequel story after there was already an entire selection of the MCU dedicated to that, which we already went away from too. So that's just something that bugged me a little bit. And bring another thing, probably the most disappointing thing about this movie is I was really excited to see a live-action Taskmaster, and sadly, it's just another generic MCU villain. Taskmaster doesn't say a single line of dialogue and just chases people. The film never uses the character's powers that creatively, and what could have been an awesome character was just a passable MCU villain. It's even more disappointing when this film gives some room for more to do with the character, but never fulfills on it. I understand MCU villains typically aren't that great, but this one was especially disappointing since there was so much potential there. Also, finally, two minor things. First, the first 30 minutes or so of this film flow extremely weirdly. It'll go way too slow and then way too fast and then repeat. The first act is sort of confusing in the way it plays out. And then one last thing. Florence Pugh and David Harbour are so good in this movie that they kind of overshadow our lead, Black Widow. ScarJo does a great job, I assure you. She always does a great job, and especially here. But I don't know if she does enough in this film in particular to where she can stand against these two, as they desperately try to steal the movie from her. And so there was a little bit of a weird balance there. And so that's about it for the bad. I'm going to move into the conclusion now. And so Black Widow is a film with heart, fantastic performances, great action, a more interesting storyline for the MCU, some nice origin story, and more. Unfortunately, though, it probably was made a little too late into the MCU, and there are a couple of other frustrating things about it. But overall, I had a very good time with this one. See it in the theaters if you can. If you're a fan of the MCU, and especially if you're a fan of the character of Black Widow, you'll probably really like this movie like I did. If you're not crazy about the MCU, though, this is not going to win you over, most likely. I'm going to give it a B and a 7.5 out of 10. I recommend this for Marvel fans. And overall, I really like this movie. Even though I did have some problems with it, overall, I really appreciated the different direction, the origin, and, of course, just those two actors, Florence Pugh and David Harbour. And so this was a really good time. It's more middle-of-the-road MCU, but it's a worthwhile entry. So those are my thoughts on Black Widow. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you could subscribe to the channel, like the video, or dislike it if you're a heartless human being. Let me know in the comments if YouTube allows there to be a comment section. Do you agree with this video? Do you disagree? What was your favorite thing about this movie? And how does it rank? I'm going to be doing, hopefully, a video tomorrow ranking the MCU. I can't promise that, but I'm going to try my best to do it. So that's something to look forward to. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!